Boo! And welcome to another session of the Wise Asylum. Hope you've had a good week. Oh, lots going on, is there not? Oh, fakery on fakery. We'll get into that a bit later. But first, what have I found going on in the world today? Well, Australia. What is going on? What is going on in your fine nation? It would appear 1,000 of your schools have entered a programme in which they are feeding your flea bags crickets. Crickets, I tell you. Not so bad if you're an original, perhaps. But I don't think Scott and Charlene are going to be very happy eating crickets, are they not? So, oh dear, I don't know what's going on down under. But it doesn't come across as very good to me. I've seen a lot of things this week about the old Australia that I'm not right happy with, and I don't think Australians should be happy with them either. But we'll not dwell on that. Of course, what else is going on? There's big news at the Ukraine, of course. Well, Zelensky, he's had a bit of luck. He's had a bit of luck indeed. He's had a bit of a success where he's took over quite a lot of territory off the Russians. It would appear Vlad and his impalers are not doing very well at the impaling of recent times, in that Vlad has been showing off in the Middle East on exercises and pandering to Z over there in the old China, while Z runs around trying to rob the dollar and put everybody into bricks. So there's loads going on. It's all interesting stuff. And of course now, we've had a major diversion, have we not? Very well set, I have to say. Perfect timing for 12 days of mourning for the old Queenie's popped her clogs. So that's interesting in and of itself. But the timing, you got the Vatican, didn't he announce at the end of last month, all assets belonging to all the parishes across the world have to be in the hands of the Vatican Bank by September the 30th. I meant to speak about that a couple of weeks ago, but I forgot. I kept forgetting. We got that excited on what we gibber on about that we forgot to speak of that. So sorry about that. But yeah, it's all going on. What are they covering? What's about to happen? We got the ration packs that they know they're playing with for 2023. Of course, they'll probably slip them in sooner so that it gets it in the minds of the fruit bats. And everybody thinks it's fantastic and amazing. I'm looking at this fuel thing because we've got now Lord Commander Truss. I haven't thought of a good enough nickname for this one yet. Let's wait until she starts acting. And then we can see what her act's all about. And we'll afford her the correct term. So, Truss is in. Vigour, Vim. Brand new cabinet. Faces I've never seen before, if I'm truthful. So that might get interesting as we move forward. what else were I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say. We were talking about Ukraine. Well, Vlad the Impaler has cocked it up a little bit, actually. I think he's took his eyes off the ball there. And apparently, so the Russians have had to leave a place called Izim with the troops and pulled them all back to this offensive being carried out by Zelensky in Kharkov. So Zelensky's got 5 brigades in there, which is about 15,000 men. Russia is pulling troops away, but you've got to remember the fighting in this entire war so far has not actually been carried out by the Russians per se. The actual guts and ground fighting has been carried out by the militia, the Wagner Group and all the others that have pulled in, and obviously venting the anger that they've had to suffer since 2014 under this regime that were put in there by old Obama and his mate Mr. Biden, or President Biden, my apologies. So that's being dealt with, but Russia, of course, have took their eye off the ball. They're now calling in troops from central Moscow. So obviously Vlad's believing that there's going to be a bit of a potential problem here. There's not actually been much fighting this week, to say, apart from in some areas where it's just continuous, hardcore ground combat. But it looks like old Vlad there, the Impaler, has cocked it up a little bit here, and maybe he's not as ironclad as a lot of people thought he was. And I mean, damn it, last week we discussed suggested that that's exactly how NATO's seen Russia is not as potent as they actually believed. But I think what it is now, Zelensky's got quite a lot more armour. He's got special forces from all over, sure, teaching his soldiers. And yeah, Vlad seems to be making mistakes the same as he made in Syria. So that's interesting, but he has been showing off in Syria. He's parading this success around. But I think what you need to look at now potentially is the fact any kind of gain like this to the side that's made the gain, so this is the Ukrainians, is going to bolster them up somewhat, isn't it? You know, the Russians have retreated, they've gained a lot of territory, etc. Not with much fighting to say anyway, really, but just they took their eye off the ball of old Ruskies. They didn't have it as well fortified as they must have thought. Of course, as I said, the main fighting is being carried out by the militias, which have been formed since 2014 to oppose what were going on against them. So they were ready and raring to go from the get-go. Russia is basically he's supplying all the artillery support for everything, the intelligence, and of course they're using a lot of drone stuff out there to actually gain that intelligence. So Russia, as potent as it has been, appears to be maybe slacked a touch there, a bit like they did in Syria on 1 or 2 occasions. So yeah, it's acceptable that for sure. I just think they should call all this stuff off and stop fighting like little babies and sort the shit out, to be fair. Looks like we've got enough troubles going on. Of us own, everywhere, all of us. So obviously this week with the Queen having been announced that she's now gone, there's a lot of Q stuff out there and you can't help but come across it. So I thought, well, okay, let's have a little look. I haven't looked at Q for about forever. And, the cultish atmosphere around it is quite significant. They're using all numerology. They're using so much of the occult, but just enough that they know a lot of people might dabble in and have a bit of an awareness about numbers, especially. They're pulling that in left, right, and centre. You know, it's like, what is going on, really? They're covering something here, and it's got to be something to do with this financial stuff, perhaps. Especially on the back of what the pretend Pope has called in. Which is quite worrying, because if all the parishes that the Catholic Church is still held up in can no longer help the flock through whatever's coming, that's quite a sinister game going on there by the old vicar of the old Christ, I would have to say. Not good at all. Because, of course, if they've no funds, they've had to sell the assets back, etc., etc. Well, you know, who's left to do this feeding of the 5 billion? Well, you're looking at evangelicals, aren't you? You know, them backstreet happy clappy churches that we all used to laugh at. They're now in some serious power. Serious power indeed. And of course, the Church of England. What is that these days, if not exactly a part of the same? In fact, it's probably controlling it. That was my experience when I did it. Went to the church to see what were going on for quite a few years, actually, way back. And I was quite shocked. It's clear that the vicar they brought in were more of an African shame. It was white, but obviously as a family they'd been out there for 10, 15 years, brought up the kids, etc. That's not Church of England. So I'm wondering, what is the Church of England today? Because of course the presumed king has taken the first part of his passage to ascension. Although I'm quite worried with some of the way that this is being presented. That are they going to try and do away with the coronation oath altogether? Because it would seem the media, in the manner Greg Oller had presented to us, are claiming this to be fact, rather than going through the full thing. But of course, the oath he's just taken now was about specifically upholding the Protestant Church of England, specifically using the term Protestant. So, what are they protesting anymore? What is it they're actually doing? It's Vatican II. The evangelicals are the main body, probably, of bringing in any kind of cash. They're running the food banks. They're in the job centres everywhere. It's a bit worrying, you know, that they're just cancelling everything out except these particular systems and networks they've got set up already. So, I mean, the food banks, we were onto that immediately. 2009, 8, 10, whatever, and found that the Trussell Trust was the main one, and that were incorporating and pulling in all the evangelical churches, Oasis Trust, etc., which is a part of the Church of England. And ahead of that was Prince Philip's own Dulverton Trust. Now, we're going to get into some very interesting data in a short while. There's just one report I'd like to just post by that I put up this week on the website, but from that moment on, we will move into the Queen is dead, long with the King. And now, it's going to branch off into some strange areas. Now, nothing silly, but just a little bit of history, and not necessarily of any consequence other than it's running our monarchy, that you will find exceptionally interesting if that is the kind of data you are looking to learn and understand. So we're going to get into that with some very interesting, my pulling together of certain things and facts that may help us to see things in a completely different way and understand exactly what it is we're up against and how and to whom this no-hide system is operating for, because we have 3 ruling families to take a little look at, and that's all I'm going to say. So without further ado, let's have a little look at this little report I put up this week, and it's War at Lithium and the Clean Energy Reset. So if we're looking for cause, we're looking for what it is that's moving all this animosity between the powers. And more importantly, how Australia plays a key role at this present time in this whole situation, meaning Australia could well become the powerful, all-powerful corporation in the future. However, there are other issues that could detract that as an absolute power, but this idea of Australia being set up specifically to be the pivotal point of power for this empire, we learned of a guy called Frater, I forgot actually, but I've got it on my Alpha page, where he goes through, in his memoirs, he's explaining exactly what had been set up in Australia by the Temple Crown. And to say it was the high altar of satanic control is an understatement. So we'll not go into that, but this is important in the sense it gives us an idea of what actually is driving this this insanity between the big powers. But of course, the priesthood itself, the ruling bloodlines that are hidden, they're the beneficiaries from all this. They're running all nations, which again we're going to get a glimpse in this data just a little bit later on. But we've covered so much of it. You all understand now about the Noahide system. You know it exists. You have an idea of what it is. You have an idea of how the legal system, this person stuff, ties into that, and is how they're going to drag our estates entirely. So basically, the monarch, what she's done, because she took the chair of the estates 3 days after ascending, which means she climbed off the throne, because she took up the chair of the estates, which means all the mineral wealth. So all the mineral wealth 6 inches below belongs to that person in this game, whereas her husband, Prince Philip, he then were claiming all the assets, property, etc., to the persons on the land so claimed through that person. So that's, again, is very interesting. So we'll have a little look at that as well, because it's all tying into, hopefully, if I can get it right, giving us a really good idea of just what is going on and who are benefiting from this. But before I do that, I'll just have a chat with you guys, see what you guys are up to. Hello, Paul. Good evening to you. Mute. Good evening. Paul, again, good evening. Slipknot. Hello there, son. How you doing? He says. Space Hop per Mark. How do? How do to you? Jeff, hello, evening. Gary, hello to you, my friend. We've just spoke about your neck of the woods. I don't know whether you catched it, but I don't know whether you know, but 1,000 schools in your fine nation are now feeding your flea bags in school crickets. So you might want to get onto that. There's a news report, or at least a couple that I pulled up. Anthony says, evening, Sean, and of course all the other good folk. Good evening, Anthony. Sean, any more update on the ICCPR you did from your Supreme upload? Article 3 ICCPR states men and women have the right to civil and political rights. Yeah, it's basically saying you have the right to it if you so wish. The state assumes it. That's why you're having problems. So, as it says, everybody has the right in law to be person. So they're giving you the right to be if you so choose. Now, the way that they're flipping that is they're assuming that's exactly what you are, that's your standing. And then they get into a bit of combat with you if you're trying to rebuff that. So, no updates, my friend, because in all truth, I haven't really gone back to that since that time I spent on it. So, and nothing's been done apart from it's gone where it needs to go, to the minds that understand this stuff even better than me. And once they absorb it, it'll be. I'm always happy to hear their view, their take, what they think, what they feel, how it should be used, and then usually we can formulate something, and we can present it to all on here, and hopefully we can start bringing that to bear, which is interesting. And yeah, so no dates unfortunately at the moment, but we obviously it's in the mix, and we will come back to it at some point with more data. So if we can get to this this report, it's not massive. It says in last Sunday's live stream we went through a few prophecies. One prophet's work in particular was very well received. That prophet was Mother Shipton, a wise woman from Yorkshire. 2 verses heralded a rather perturbing picture relating to the effects of a great global war. And I'll recite what we all sort of picked up on, which was, and Christian 1 fights Christian 2. And nations sigh, yet nothing do. And we've been doing that since First World War, haven't we? And yellow men great power gain from mighty Burr, with whom they've lain, which is Russia. These mighty tyrants will fail to do. They fail to split the world in two. But from their acts a danger bred, an augur leaving many dead. So we talk, he said in the stream, I suggested the augur could be the result of nuclear conflagration or indeed a biological attack. However, there is another aspect to what this augur could be. 220 years ago on a small island off Sweden, called Utah, a mineral that was brittle, clear, and with a yellow and whitish tint, was found by Joseph Bonifacio Andrade, a geology professor at the University of Coimbra. It was seen to be worth no further attention, and was put away in a Swedish laboratory for 17 years. The lab called it petalite. After 17 years, Swedish chemist John Jacob Berzelius decided to analyse the mineral and found an element never before known to science. The element behaved similar to potassium and sodium, but was much less soluble in water and appeared more solid. Also, they named this new element lithos, Greek for stone. We call it lithium. Up until the 1940s, lithium was only used in the production of ceramic bowls and for the treatment of the insane, so-called. As World War II approached, lithium began to be used as the grease in the engines for military application, specifically in the fighter and bombers of the Air Force. Lithium was still only a small part of the human equation until it was realised how important it was for thermonuclear detonation, when heated and had thrust upon it subatomic particles, namely neutrons. After that, lithium became a huge part of the human world. In essence, lithium became the root of the Cold War situation, in having both the Soviet Union and the United States of America in the race to procure the most devastating nuclear weapons. From 1947 till 1989, this arms race would see the United States create some 40,000 warheads, while the Soviet Union produced 32,000. And as we understand today, many of these tests, some 1,747 in all, between them, left a serious auger in all areas where they were tested, and we know that. So there's a few links to the toxicity to humans of the use of lithium, the dangers of lithium batteries, environmental problems with lithium batteries, etc. Not only that, I always put up on the Facebook every time it comes up that another electric vehicle set on fire, because have you seen the ferocity of the flames? If you were in that, you would not be getting out. It's quite serious that if they do go up in flames, they are nigh impossible to put out, and they go from 0 to 1,000 in an instant. So there's dangers with this that they don't promote, which I think we all need to be aware of. But more importantly, lithium itself is, I think, quite possibly a serious threat to soils, to everything. Because if the world becomes full of it in everything, which it's going to be, that's not healthy. It says we also have another noxious chemistry in the use of depleted uranium in weaponry used by all methods of warfare, including down to the round each soldier's rifle. This has also caused a serious hidden auger in both soldiers and civilians alike in all areas that have seen war since the First Gulf War. So that's 1990. During the Cold War, lithium was mined all over the earth, with the United States being the largest miner of lithium up until the 1990s, when the need for lithium ceased as the nuclear arsenals were deconstructed. So basically, lithium came back to nothing again once they'd stopped racing to build these nuclear weapons. In the 1990s, Sony actually released the first commercial superlight lithium battery. So it started in the 90s really with Sony, and then it'd take a big leap in 2007 when Apple launched the iPhone. But it would be the need for a better battery in the laptop, which of course again came through this I system that Apple put out. So that would see a second rise in the use of lithium. So there's a graph showing lithium use where it is to 2020. So it's just, so you've got here 2007, and it's just gone up and up and up and up and up. It's gone up like crazy, and it's got everything to do with this smart system. But more importantly, it's the backdrop to this clean so-called energy grid, which is rather worrying, because on the one hand, it's everything that's been put into this clean energy grid is about clean on the environment, safe to humans, etc., etc. But in fact, it's one of the most dangerous exercises we could possibly go with, this mass use of lithium everywhere. says all things would change as the mobile phone industry moved into the smart grid. The technology required a much more potent battery to power the expectations of the control mechanism in your pocket. 2 more industries would expand the further need for lithium by 600% as the rise of the electric car took off. And so too the clean energy systems that require batteries to store the electricity created from the so-called clean energy methods. So that's your wind farms, innit, and all that malarkey. Lithium became the main factor in procuring full control of the technocratic system. So then he who has the lithium can obviously be in control of all the systems and the manufacturing of the stuff that you need in order to put this together. So you're going to be king. With the claim that using lithium is good for the environment, or with many uneducated fruitcakes in all support. Nothing to do with vested interest, it's all about saving the world. So they're not about saving the world now. It's not about saving the environment, it's all about I'm getting paid. I look fantastic and amazing. Look at me, aren't I groovy? That's where it's at, isn't it? It's no longer, nobody cares a toss. You can't be into the environment and not see the dangers of lithium that's building the very system you're promoting. No, it's about cash in the back pocket and look at me, I get on telly. So of course, with these battery systems now, which is where I'm thinking, you can pollute the land to such a degree, it's been ridiculous. So in Australia, again, they've created the biggest battery storage system at 450 megawatt. And it's now online. So this is a lithium-based massive storage facility, now operational. So they're starting to do this, they're trying to create this. And it just makes lithium so required by all these powers that are ultimately aiming to who's controlling this system, this system, this clean energy, the lot. It's on the 21st of January 2022, it was announced there was a shortage of lithium across the world. So that's January 21st this year. This claim alone increased the cost of electric cars, so that put them up. Smartphones went up through the roof. And to construct the so-called clean energy grid, so they've put that up massively as well. So all this environmental stuff is just pushing more and more tax money into this building of this rather frightening, environmentally terrifying grid system. It says this caused massive expansion for nations to seek to become the kings of all things lithium, because the EU controls lithium, controls the future energy, transport and global economic systems. In short, the opportunity to become king of the world is open. So this is what the priesthood, this is how the priesthood get these nations that they control, the superpowers, to do all the work for them, because they're the beneficiaries of it. Everybody else is just a pawn in it. The largest producer of lithium today is Australia, at 45% of the total lithium mined. China is the largest processor of lithium at 50%. So 45% of lithium is coming out of Australia, but 50% of all lithium in the world is being processed in China. In this manner, Australia is key to the control of the lithium. The battle line between the United States and China, Australia at this point could become the largest power by far in the global lithium industry, which would give her leverage in the war between the United States and China. This is also a very dangerous position to hold when 2 mammoth military powers have to beg for your favour. Get it wrong and you'll be squashed by the hands of one or both of those who serve the gravy. So, although it looks like they could be king at world Australia, it could also go tits up for them as well if one of the other nations decides to have it. Now, the biggest mining conglomerate that's in Australia pulling this lithium is, of course, American. It's called Albemarle. It says the United States, through the corporation Albemarle, has purchased the majority of lithium mining rights in Australia, and also in a newfound land rich in lithium, said to be potentially holding half of all lithium on the earth, and they call it the Lithium Triangle. And it's in the Atacama Desert, which is a desert bordered by Bolivia, Chile and Argentina. This means to process 50% of the world's lithium, which China does, they are buying it from the United States. So this is quite a complex situation going on, isn't it, between these superpowers. China processes it but has to buy it off America. So that's really interesting. Now there's a South Korean company called POSCO which is investing 830 million in a new lithium plant in Argentina. So even South Korea are moving against China in that respect, because obviously that's going to take away a big chunk of the processing that China's currently doing, which of course gives them access to it. Because China's not very rich in minerals. It's got copper, but we'll get into that in a minute, because these super fruitcakes in Europe have shot themselves in the foot in such a way that the priesthood, when you look at it from their level, it's perfect how they're playing it, but it's all about the plants in your government, your cabinets, your aristocracies, because it's the aristocracies that are also benefiting from this new system. They've decided to pull this together between them. And again, this data we'll look at after, again, puts your eyes into that idea. If you are a competing global superpower, you have two methods of undoing this situation. So the fact that Australia has a big player, and that in a bit Bolivia, Argentina and Chile are going to have a big part to play. So you're in a bit of a position. So there's two global superpowers competing, and there's two methods that they can deal with it. So you either gain the rights in more places than the United States and their allies, or you go to war. First economically, well, that's been going on. Then by subversion, which again has been going on, and that's been going on since, if you look socially, since the 20s, and before that even, but definitely so from the 20s. Again in the 50s, 60s, and then in the 90s, again, we're using drugs, which takes you off the ball. Now the only other way is by all-out invasion, isn't it, of the existing producers' land and take control by force. Now there's some very strange things going on in Australia and New Zealand in relation to China buying up property. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, which is something that we've been looking at now for quite a while, you find that they're all doing it on behalf of the Adelphi in London. Okay, it used to be the home of the Hanoverians, and once they went back to Scotland, it became the headquarters of all the colonial, imperial, mammoth corporations. Set up the Fabian Society, London School of Economics, all coming out of this one particular network. So whatever's going on through China, we say via China, but the beneficiaries, it comes back to Delphi, which of course, that's the beneficiaries we can see. Ultimately, the beneficiaries are the hidden royalty above the Committee 300. So it's interesting stuff, but there's a lot going on in Australia, and so it shows that there's a sleight of hand there. They're pulling up on the one hand this battle between America and China, which to the politicians, to the military minds and the populations is real, and therefore it is real. It's being made manifest. Yet above that is another string of puppeteers, just using the energies of all these nations to pull this together to serve ultimately those at the top. So, China has been very busy in both Australia and New Zealand buying up rights and property. China has also been buying rights in Africa. And again, there's big conflicts, isn't it? Because NATO set up AFRICOM in order to try and stop China from taking over ex-colonial, etc., connected to the empire. Russia is a big producer. So Chinese Australian investors battle for the largest lithium deposit. So the Australians have actually now started to battle with the Chinese, and I think the first move of this is when China banned sale of Australian coal in China. So China shot themselves in the foot a little bit there. So this battle has been going on for a bit, and of course now Australians are using this lithium side of things to actually push back against China. Just looking there, it says AVZ may lose control of Congo project, according to Boatman. Company disputes Zijin's claim to Manano lithium project. So there's all sorts going on with this lithium thing, and it's driving a lot of this superpower clash. Russia's a big producer of copper. Get this. So this is how clever the European fruit bats are. Russia is a big producer of copper, and up to the day sanctions were laid against her by the Western collective after the Ukraine invasion, sold over 50% of that copper to Germany and the Netherlands and Turkey. So they've sanctioned the nation that was selling them 50% of its copper production to Germany, Netherlands and Turkey, and now they've sanctioned the living daylights out to Russia. Not clever. This means they have to buy elsewhere, causing yet more problems for the collective West. It also offers China another supply outside the Western powers. China has very little of its own mineral requirements, although she does have some copper. This shows how the Ukraine conflict has been set out by the bankers to completely disrupt the global supply chain in all things imported and exported. The perfect storm for dividing the world into two sides, as described by Mother Shipton, as the two sides scramble for precious resources, specifically those required for the New World Order's technocracy. Russia will now offer only her partners in BRICS the copper she produces and processes, which, of course, she's going to do. But again, we get back to Mother Shipton. She's talking about the yellow races and tallying up with Russia. So, obviously, she probably didn't see it in this way, but this is what it's telling me. That the bankers are using proactively China and Russia to move this sort of final stage in this path to global war. So that's what she was saying. Obviously, she didn't recognise that there's something above that moving both. There is another aspect to this game, Afghanistan, under Biden, we saw the pullout. Sorry, there's another aspect to this game, Afghanistan. Under Biden, we saw the pullout of the United States forces, leaving billions of dollars worth of military hardware. Biden being subject to the will of China presents a real tangible reasoning for Biden's decision, which can only help to serve China's hunt for mineral resources, because Afghanistan's full of it. It must also be recognised that Elon Musk is doing all he can to secure Afghanistan's lithium wealth. In other words, Afghanistan is in the middle of a new war, the war of corporate need. And of course, Elon Musk being a front, you don't see it as the bankers moving in the military-industrial complex, you just see it as the privateer, racketeer, Elon Musk, when it's just a front. So Elon Musk's in there, which means East-West again is going on in Afghanistan, but over lithium. So why would you leave all that hardware unless your boss has told you, which is China and especially Russia, isn't it? I mean, there's stuff out this week I've seen about Boris Johnson. He was in Russia. Something very odd happened at a particular party that he were at, with this particular group of people that were very powerful. And he ended up outside on his own with none of his security, looking like something really horrific had happened to him. Now, what did happen to him in there? Did he get compromised? Which is how they do it. You're drugged, you wake up, you've got a child on you, boom, they've got it. Explain that away. This is how they do these kind of things. Is something like that happened to Boris Johnson when that was going on? I mean, we have to look at it like this. And Russia is playing a big part of this, as Mother Shipton recognised. Russia and China are the ones that are playing this blackmail, this subversion economically and subverting our society. But again, who's controlling them? This is what we're going to get into. It has been projected that by the 2040 electric vehicles will account for 49% of global silver supply. So not only is it nicking this grid gold, silver, lithium, it's also pulling in all the precious metals, silver. It's quite ridiculous that we're actually allowing this thing to go on. Now, even solar panels, they use 100 million ounces per annum to create them. So this clean energy grid isn't. So it says it would appear the clean energy fancy born of the Club of Rome is potentially the most catastrophic attack on the environment and to man itself. There have been very serious moves to empty California over the last decade. First, they debauched Hollywood enough to have those who called it home leave. There have been many strange fires in the hills around California, which saw what looked like laser beams coming from aircraft destroying only the actual properties and the populations within them, sometimes while in their cars. the aluminium actually melted on the highway, such was the heat of the lasers. This begins to make sense when you consider the fact much of the East Coast is looking like the new gold rush, albeit white gold, which is how lithium is today being described. Draining off lakes and other water holdings could well be to allow access to some of the potentially lithium-rich land to be prospected. Lake Mead and the Salton Sea could well be the big part of this hunt for lithium. Silver is also required for solar panels to the tune of around 100 million ounces per annum, which shows clearly that this so-called clean energy grid is nothing of the sort. There are two other options for batteries, so you can use zinc and the redox flow system, so there doesn't have to be lithium. All said and done, we must not forget the most important ingredient in this new technological battery system, an ingredient that the media never includes when they push the corporate line for all things clean energy. The ingredient of interest would be the means to produce the electricity in the first instance. Whether they like it or not, oil and coal is still in the mix. In the main methods of filling those batteries with all things electricity. And it is, it is. The conclusion I've put is we know the effects of depleted uranium on soldiers, civilians and the environment. We can see just how active lithium can be when those electric vehicles set on fire. Then there is the danger of the batteries in the smartphones which tend to explode. I can only conclude that this auger of which Mother Shipton speaks would be the use of all these mineral resources in warfare. Now we can see how the earth would be cursed. Nothing would grow and life would be unable to exist. From this image of the future, we must cease in laying the blame upon God. If this future is to come to pass, it will be entirely at the feet of man. Will it not? It will be entirely at the feet of man. I never transitioned that over, did I? Me gobbing off. Oh, it's gone funny anyway. I don't know. It always goes bloody funny. I don't get it. I don't know why it does that. I really don't. So that I thought were interesting because lithium is playing a big part in this nonsense, to be fair. And it's not good at all. So, what should we make of this week's action? I'll have a chat, see where you're at, chat. Evening, Mike. Morning, Hill 1. Hi all, it's 17 days of mourning according to the sun. I think it's 12 on as a sort of protocol. I'll have to check that again, but I'm pretty sure it's 12. I just saw something that said petrol stations will soon take £100 from your card before you can get fuel. Then we'll give back what you didn't use. There are some already doing that, so that's nothing new. That's what ISA brothers want. Petrol stations. I recommend the house crickets, nice with a bottle of red. Okay. Also, you've eaten them, Furfur. Do you have the crickets with the chips or rice? I also think it's suspicious that both Apple and Android have done updates. Ready for what? Nobody's done. You can't get any updates on mine. You give yourself developer permissions, you can block everything. Which I did many moons ago. I did it all and I put it all on the Facebook. I weren't actually doing live streams then. I have tried to retrieve the data, but YouTube, FaceAche only let me go so far back in that very controlled Facebook page that I have. So I do, if I can find it somewhere else, I will actually go through it again because you can do this on all Android phones. It's slightly different for Apple, but the Android, you can do it on the Apple, but it's a different process. But you just get into the real guts of the phone. And apart from real high-end Intel, you can block anybody and everybody else from getting into your phone. All apps, nothing can do anything. But again, another point with the phones is, when I did have internet use on my phone, I had very few apps. I got rid of every app that I never using. Because you look at the permissions on the apps, they can do all sorts. They can even edit your messages. I mean, how easy to set you up? If a message that you never sent, or that you sent the message but the content wasn't the same as what had been shifted to. I mean, that might be a bit more difficult than that actually, because they'd have to change it on the others as well. But if they were, if these guys wanted to do it, they could certainly do it. Cause hello to you. Now then, I'm going to have to faff about a bit here, I think. Because it's... So, King Charles the Man. Why is that not doing it? Okay, let's just get back here. I just have to go through this silly motion. Because it doesn't work. There we go. Is it transitioning? It's not transitioning. Well, that should transition. We'll pull it back to 1. Can you see that at your end? Can you see the report that says what will Britain be under Charles III? Can anybody give me a heads up? No, there's a delay on these, isn't there? I'll have to try and get rid of that. Anybody? Oh, that's fine. Okay, right, I think I might have sussed something here then. So I did this in December 2018. It says the man on the end of the finger is the future King of Great Britain, Charles Philip Arthur George Windsor. The man pointing the finger at the future King of the Isles is a Jew and has the surname of Rothschild. Okay, so that picture speaks 1,000 words. Okay, who is in control in that little shindig? Yeah, you get what I'm saying there? That's all you need to ever see to know what the hell is about to take place. Now, in my opinion, Charles is only going to be for a very short term. It's it's the deception on the last deception that they're going to try and pull together now, acclaim it, proclaim it, have nobody rebuff it, and then once they've accomplished that as a consensual, this is the law shit, William's in, it's in the Noahide. That's what I see. So we need to pay attention. I also watched something today as the procession is actually going through. It got to Edinburgh. Now, they were doing the cannon salute, and the folk of Edinburgh were booing. Now, I wasn't expecting to hear that. They were booing at a very loud. There were a lot. So I don't know what's going on with that. Obviously, I don't watch TV. I haven't watched a single thing of it apart from this recent oath thing is took on the proclamation. Excuse me. My throat's dry. And I watched his first speech to the nations. Other than that, I've not really took much interest. Now, he says, in truth, one can forget the following verbiage if one wishes to understand the essence of this report. Everything you need to know is in the image above. The House Rothschild control the personal finance of the fiction Queen Elizabeth II, and in the private, as Elizabeth Mary Windsor. In truth, they are controlling what are their own portfolios, with Queen Elizabeth at the front. The same house is financing the importation of the third world natives across Europe to subvert and destroy all remnants of Christendom. Because the Church of England doesn't represent Christendom anymore. It's Vatican II. So the question now raised will be, what will the Church of England become under this monarch? Well, they were forced to say it would uphold the Protestant Church of England in that thing that I saw. So that, unless it's by shenanigans with the Church of England actually encompassing more than we think, which will be my suspicion, or his idea that he wants to represent all faiths has gone out the window. But for him to say that, and you could tell he was uncomfortable saying it, he did oath it. So we have to keep his eye on that. So I'm not at the mind with him. But yeah, this is another thing with me, and a lot of people do misunderstand me, and completely. I am of the mind that the greatest monarchical system that I'm aware of was the English. And I say that because Alfred set it up. As the church got more powerful, it sort of took over, and this was the new church, started to put its oar in and picked it up. 1066, then we got that. But an interesting thing about this monarchy is the fact that it was forever curtailing the powers of the monarch, the powers of the state. And that's why, although it was still classed as and connected to the Catholic Church's ideal, it was also steps away from it because, of course, it limited the king's, the monarch, the power of the monarch, and also the parliament. So, for that, and that alone, and the fact that we incorporated common law as the law and nothing other than, again, two guys from here, Cork and Blackstone, those two's works on the common law and English law is the foundation of America. Now they would say they bettered it, which you may say so, but when you get into the nuts and bolts of a constitutional monarchy and how it works, it's an absolutely amazing thing. And it's amazing in the sense that the monarch is given sovereignty by the people. It's not of their own fruition. It's not at the will of a foreign power, which the Constitution forbids. It's entirely at the will of the population, the people. You don't get sovereignty unless the people agree. And for the people to agree, you have to be upholding the Constitution. And that's why you're getting all these proclamations that we've had, the coronation oath and ascension, etc. It's the protocols of the English Constitution, but they're slight-handing it, you see. And this is what we have. They did it in 53, yeah. In fact, they did it before that as well. We might be able to cover that as well, but they're going to, and everything that's been accumulated through the Queen as the Charity Estates, licensing Philip to collect, it's that empire now that is being handed to this new network under Charles, in case there's problems, because he's already debauched in everybody's eyes. The aristocracy have known this for a long time, which is where Greg's work comes in when he says that they've been extorted because they're fake. And that's known, and that's why the aristocracy are in control, because they're allowing this, because they're benefiting from having a man or a woman previously that will do exactly what they're told. And that's what people need to understand. But I'm not against the English constitutional system, even with a parliament, if it's representative of the people and not, as it stands, it's a private corporation. Yeah, I support our system, absolutely. What I've come to learn is that the highest office of power in the nation is the office of monarch. And when I realised that that was the problem as to why this nation hadn't been upheld, that's when I got excited way back in the day. And then brought that court case, etc. Which got me CID ringing me if the Queen were anywhere near Lancashire, what you up to, blah, 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 blah. And such. So it got me in a lot of problems and put me up to the top of the list as a... But of course, I'm not a danger to anybody in the sense that all I'm doing is just going, hey, oh, what you're talking is bollocks. What's wrong with that? That's the right of every human, every man, every person. Take your pick. So that's where I got excited. It was just because I realised that it wasn't being upheld. I should have known a little bit more about it then, but I didn't. So just off I went. But there we go. So it's important that we get to grips with exactly what it is that's going on. Now, this report goes through how Charles Philip Arthur George Windsor plays the game, specifically Duchy of Cornwall. So that's an interesting look to read. I'll put this up underneath again, as I said. We mentioned Australia here again, Windsor Estate. We're just going through certain things that you can find in relation to what the game is. Of course, he's handed the Duchy of Cornwall over to William, announced that Camilla is going to be Queen Consort. And it's being proclaimed. This is what people need to remember. They're acclaiming it, saying to you, oh, this is how it is. And everybody's going, okay. When really we should be going, up your ass, it doesn't conform. Or first off, just a minute, does it conform with the English constitutional law? If it does, go it on. If it doesn't, what are you playing at? But of course, who's playing it? That picture says everything. Does it not? Okay? That's what we're now under. So you see power, whatever's going on, from the minute this guy's, well, from now, he is the man to the right of your image that's really telling it how it is. Okay? And I think that's rather worrying. We have to be exceptionally careful here. So let's have a look. Let me just check that I'm getting this in right order. Because I can put forward what Edward was actually fighting and further support my claim that contrary to all available garbage, Edward I was the greatest English king we've had. By far. And from him and his ideas sprouted the chivalric system, etc., etc., which, to my mind, wasn't really a bad way for the hoity-toits to actually behave relative to protecting the realm, keeping the Christendom going, because Edward was a staunch Christian, especially because of his wife. So let me just check that I'm going to get the right one. Come on, because right now, Britain's plan for when Queen Elizabeth II dies. Has that come up? It has. We'll just have a look at where you guys are at so we don't get lost. So, A up lad to cause, A up cause. A says, yep, Mupate, yes bud. PY, yes. Thanks for that, chaps. Charlie boy getting a bollocking. Well, exactly. I mean, I've seen so much stuff about how Charlie is abused by all the leaders of the world because he's fraud. You won't believe it. It's sick. So this guy, I've always felt sorry for him as well. You know, this guy's had so much abuse throughout his life. First from Mountbatten. You know, he was terrified of his father. But some of the stuff I've read in the day about just what's happened to him growing up, he's quite horrendous. So I'm early. Treen, what a gem! You are doing well. Where are you? Like it middle of nowhere or Australia or something like that? Or is you just not only just got up? Because if you're really like, anyway, well done. She's here. I'll give Charlie the magic 33 days before Juan Carlos' son William takes over to be the King of Jerusalem. Yeah. Well, I don't know about 33 days. To be fair, mind you, I mean, I would suggest they do something like that when they have got everybody starving, totally focused to surviving, no energy at all for giving a monkey's toss what's going on outside their own little bubble. I'm not going to say no, but I think 33 days is probably a little... You know, they've a lot to achieve in this, if they can, to shift what is England, what is Scotland, what is Wales, what is Northern Ireland, into this Noahide system, because the protocols are clear that the last nation to be brought under this system is the British Isles, because they've used the British Isles system to front the entire shit. That's what they've done. And to cement, again, the idea that because it were Protestant, it's the greatest surviving monarchy system. Because all the Catholic ones got demolished through Napoleon. French Revolution, yeah? So that's why they chose, and of course the Dutch monarchy kept powerful too. Again, just to keep that game going, you're separate, and you're more fantastic. No, they just kept them to front it, the empire, and that's why they set the empire up in inner city, because of course this was the last one. This was the one they were going to use right up to the very end. So this is all about destroying the English monarchical system. Okay, my problem has always been with the incumbent family because they're not what they appear, and everything that's negative that's undone England has been done in a big part under this last reign of 70 years. I mean, most of us alive today don't know any different. With us, the Queen is the only face we've ever known in the position of Queen. We read about the previous monarchs, but we don't have any, that were my grandparents and such that knew that. Let's have a look. Gorbachev, you mean Gorbachev? Oh, they're not doing a state funeral for him, are they? Greg Allett tried to do something that, in my opinion, deserves respect, because the guy went all the way that he could until he got the final treacherous act, which pulled it to pieces, but did get all the data in the mix. So, yeah, I don't know what happened to him, but, what he tried didn't come to fruition, but he did put a lot of data in the mix. So, for that, the man gets kudos, You've got to... Because I know what he's gone through. You know what I'm saying? A lot of what he would speaking about when he's talking about looking back in his childhood, and he can register the times when they were trying to screw things up and fuck him over. Excuse me. I've had that same experience where, in hindsight, as I was pulling out of the programme and into myself, I could see those times back in my childhood when it was a clear hit or attempt by the occultists who were aware that somebody was in this area that were going to cause them problems. So I can relate to that, so... Yeah, but he did his best, and I don't think it were a failure in essence. So, because of the data he actually put in, and just put it there for people to further research, etc. It's sleight of hand. It's all sleight of hand, isn't it? Where did King Gregor? Yeah, sorry. Watch out for the Gorbachev. Nobichok. Then, haha, wipe your door handles, and no picking up. All right, got you. I had a couple of dodgy-looking men at my door claiming to be looking for my ex-neighbour who was jailed for hacking into Microsoft. Hid their lanyards and wouldn't give their names. And that's in Edinburgh area. Okay, Joe. Anthony says, Sean, are you familiar with the house wetting? Yes, I am. Very powerful, very old. And they do tie back into this system we're going to have a look at in a minute. Alright? We'll not go too delve on that in this particular one. Well, I'm a kick in the arsenal away from the device code, Rosalind Chapel. Okay. Well, I think you've told me this before. Yeah. That's the Da Vinci Code. Yeah, I was a bit late, as was on a YT. Okay, Chuck. About David Wynne Miller. Oh, yeah. A New World Order in 1999. Very interesting. Since Queen's death, the road leading to Haworth Castle, Highness owns it. Interesting. Yeah, they're a family and a half. Hawthorne, even Moyes Boy, that's another family. Hawthorne Castle is Drew Hines, best pal of the Q and Margaret. Road closed for 5 days. Nobichok, that substance they put on script. Yeah. Second time they came looking for him. Okay. So that's caught up with you guys. Now, this is interesting because Britain's plan for when Queen Elizabeth dies. Politicals obtained documents laying out Operation London Bridge in granular detail. Now, the key to this is the title Operation London Bridge. Okay. And it's a snippets have trickled out over the years, some suggestions that the Prime Minister will be alerted by a phone call from a civil servant telling him or her London Bridge is down. To report the death will be announced via newsflash on the Press Association wire. Because London Bridge doesn't go up and down, does it not? So London Bridge is the ancient bridge. So that's interesting. Why would that be down? But then we're going to get into it in a little minute on another report that I put together because... let's have a look here. So I need to be going over here. So that goes through what that is, what it does, what it activates. Okay, we don't really need to go into it, but I will of course put it up. Now here. So this is the one I put up on the day of the London Bridge knife attacks. Okay. Now of course I'm tying in private mercenary forces with this, and it was London Bridge knife attack, Eric Prince interview, and Abu Dhabi. So I pulled these three together. Now, what we know about this event is it was fake, because the videos, unfortunately, are no longer available that I had up on 153news.net, which looks to me like it's been demolished once and for all. He did a runner to Amazon Jungle, managed to keep it going, but I think he kept getting, he had a lot of trouble. So it's a shame. I put a lot of, all my band videos were actually on there. I'm looking at putting them on my website at some point, but I'll have to make them smaller. So they unfortunately are not there, but those videos show clearly. So one went through the shooting and now nothing sounded right, that the gunshots were coming from somewhere else, and it was a different gun to what they were saying because of the sound. And the second one showed the so-called knife attacker, after being dead and led down and bagged, unzip the bag and get up and walk away after. So that's what those two videos were actually showing. But back in the day, what I also came across, and of course I didn't present it anywhere because I didn't know whether it was right or wrong, but what they're actually saying, that the London Bridge attack was actually the cover for the fact that the day before the Queen had actually collapsed and died, and that this London Bridge attack was to carry all the media attention globally off that to that. And we're all aware that there were a lot of talk about how Prince Philip had died a lot earlier as well. So what I'm saying is they use these particular events because, of course, the monarch is not in control. They're all serving these super elite, these super ruling families. And then hid it from us so they can use it for distractions, also to play into other things. And I would suggest, if anything, that's what they've done with the Queen's death this week and what they did with Philip's death as well. But we don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but we understand, don't we, that this is how they work. This is the kind of things they do. Because these events are massive. They're so massive that it just pulls in global attention. So this could be why they're using the term Operation London Bridge. So I thought that were interesting. It needs to be sort of at least looked as possible, you know. So now then, I've got this now. Now this lady is so interesting. She's so interesting because what she's putting forward is in my opinion, because I've heard of two of these families before and tried to do research in the past, but they only went so far. Now, as soon as you find that, you know you're onto something. When everything is scrubbing them. And in some cases, as I were actually seeking out, they were coming behind me, scrubbing it off. So if I refresh my page, it was gone. So that's when I started to learn how to screenshot as soon as you find something that's interesting. But yeah, they used to chase me when I were researching these couple of families. To the point now, there's very little on, if anything, in truth. So what I'll do is I don't want to actually watch the video for the simple reason we could breach on a copyright. But it's interesting. You have to listen carefully to what she's saying. She's a Jewess, so she knows what she's talking about. Her mother, obviously, were even more so aware of a lot of things, and they obviously, these girls were clever. So I want to. So that's what she looks like. She's a gentle girl. But what I'll do, I'll flip this over to me, and I'll let you listen to this, okay? And maybe we'll pause it now and again, but just listen as carefully as you can. I'll put the volume up, so then I'll keep quiet.
With whom I wish to familiarize you a bit more and explain their significance in the world, what they're doing, and how the world we're living in is operating. The three families are Dangul, Sassoon, or Sassoon, they're also called. Vidal Sassoon is someone from that family. He's certainly not one of the highest level operators, but yes, he is from that family. And another family called Kadoi, who we don't hear very much about at all. These are the families who hail back to Ul Kasdim, which is where Avraham Avinu, our father Avraham, came out from and began the monotheistic religions. Naim Dangul, who gratefully is not in this world anymore, renewed a title for himself that hasn't been used since the 13th century. That title is Rosh Gola. Translated it into English as the Exilarch. It also has another meaning. Gol, Gal, is a pile of stones. Rosh Gola would then become the top stone in the pile of stones. That is the capstone. That's the whole thing with the capstone. Like the pyramid on the American dollar bill and all that. It's what he called himself, is Rosh Gola. I'm going to be linking to some information about him. In one of the photos of him, you'll see that this nice Jewish boy is walking around with an upside-down cross pinned on him. His father was the largest seller of Arab books. His grandfather was the chief rabbi of Baghdad. Now you can call Iraq all you want, but it will always be Babylon. And these people are still connected to Babylon, and that is still their center of operations, although they're living in Britain. Another family is Sassoon. They make much ado about being connected to the Davidic dynasty. Not all of David's sons were how shall I say, morally upright. They made a fortune in the opium trade in China. And there's another family, Kadoi. Not much is known about them. On the internet, I can't find much. Maybe some people in Britain can find out more about them. These are the people who go back all the way in time to the Babylonian and Mesopotamian, Assyrian empires of dark magic. The town that Avraham came out of is called Ul Kasdim. And in different Semitic languages, the letter Sian is sometimes pronounced as Shein. We can read Ul Kasdim as Ul Keshedim, which would make it the light like demons. The word shade comes from that, being in the shade. All of the Babylonian cultic practices involve blood sacrifice, most especially child sacrifice. And it still goes on. In fact, more than ever, they've gotten to a point of it being on an industrial level. I bought this book called The Sephardi Story some years ago. It's written by the name of Chaim Raphael. I guess I should say Chaim Raphael. A celebration of Jewish history, such as it is. And I looked into this because when my mother, Aliyah Shalom, was ill, a series of blood samples were run on her, and they found that we are not Ashkenazim as we thought, that we are very, very Mizrahi. They told my mother she had blood that they'd never seen anything like this in North America. She said, you have a blood sample like you walked out of the Middle East yesterday. So I began to look into what this means, and I bought this book. And it was in this book that I learned about Dangur, the Dangur family, for the first time. And it says, in a different form again, the personal side of the Sephardi story has been given new life in our time through the Exilarch's foundation of Naim Dangur, whose magazine, The Scribe, unifies the family memories of Eastern Sephardim all over the world. In this book, we're going to see just how deep the connection of the Jews became to Babylon. We're going to begin to understand what that wrought in the world, and we're going to begin to understand why, despite the temporary inconvenience, the decision has been made on high to plow it under and wash it away. It is not always realized how strong the links of this golden age with the continued Jewish settlement is in Babylon. The authority exercised by the Jews of Babylon had its roots many centuries earlier, during the exiles of the Jews from their kingdoms in Israel in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE. The exiles had established a rich life there. They had their own ruler, the Exilarch, and now he renews the Exilarch, right? A descendant of King David. Jewish history and law enshrined in the Bible. Enshrined in the Bible? What is it, dead? Was now the source of a new diffusion of Jewish experience spreading from Babylonian academies across the world. It was this free-flowing Jewish culture from Babylon that laid the base in time for the meaningful survival of Jews everywhere in the world. Oh, so without that, our lives wouldn't be meaningful. I want you to understand the mentality of how these traders think about Babylon. Over thousands of years, the ebb and flow of the Jewish presence there, meaning Babylon, has taken many forms, notably the outstanding role played by Jews in administration and finance, with its influence spreading today into many countries of the Sephardi diaspora. On a world scale, it was from Iraq that a number of Jews spread powerfully and beneficially into the Indian and Chinese empires, opening up and transforming the Far East to lasting effect. First of all, I want you to understand that everything that is going on now with the wars in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Iran, this is all going back to Babylon, to the Assyrian empires, the Mesopotamian empires. This is what is being cleared away. But when it says here they spread powerfully and beneficially into the Indian and Chinese empires, like what? Opium? Building opulent hotels? Like what kind of beneficial things did they bring these countries? If anything, they brought them absolute misery. It is therefore only one phase of this tradition that in our own time, prominent Sephardi personalities from Iraq emerged as they had before to exert their traditional influence on the Jewish world at large. They are trying to take over. They are trying to make the whole world into Babylon. And we're going to talk about this, please God. Names are far too numerous to list, but perhaps one can mention two that are symbolic. The first would be Naim Dan Gur, grandson of the famous Hacham Bashi, chief rabbi Hacham Ezra Dan Gur, and an imaginative projector from his base in London of a new expression of the central role of the exilarch in times gone by. In 1970, exactly 700 years after the death in 1270 of the last known exilarch, Naim Dan Gur established the Exilarch's Foundation, endowed with funds to help the young, but on a broader basis to restore the links everywhere of Jews of Babylonian descent through a journal he called the Scribe, sent all over the world. And then they speak about another, but I want to concentrate on that.
Sorry, we're having problems, it says.
Where he and his wife Irene, until her sad death this year, developed highly personal programs on a very large scale to help Sephardi youths in Israel to rise to their full potential. Charab Leben. Everything was done to trample Sephardim underfoot in the state of Israel. These local loyalties have enduring meaning, even if in Israel today the common purpose might seem to transcend them. Listen to what he's saying. He's saying that in Israel today they might seem to be transcending their loyalties to Babylon, but don't you be fooled. We're still deeply rooted in Babylon. Whoa, whoa. There is no more powerful illustration of this than the theme which surfaces so often in this book, the ancient attachment of the Jews to Babylon. One sometimes feels that it has a quasi-mystic quality of the kind that is echoed, strangely enough, in the words of an old English nursery rhyme. How many miles to Babylon? 70 miles and 10. Can I get there by candlelight? Yes, and back again. Bible study had continued in Babylon after and he puts it like in one quote, the return. In other words, he's saying there never really was a return, that they always had their center in Babylon. So he doesn't take the Jews who wanted to come back to Israel seriously at all. The return, like putting it in quotes. Ready, as we shall see, to reach the high standards of Israel itself. So they start to now compete with Israel. Half-jokingly, the Jews of Babylon would claim that they were superior to those of Israel. They would never dispute the basic holiness of Jerusalem, with which nothing could compare, but, with the yet, with the but, you get it? Ifs, ands, and buts, and yets. But in material terms, they were far more prosperous. And the head of their self-government, the Reish Galuta, the head of the exile, which I told you was also called the capstone, was a direct descendant of King David, or so they claimed. All countries, said one rabbi, are second-rate compared to the land of Israel, and the land of Israel is second-rate compared with Babylonia. This is a bad translation. Let me tell you what it actually says. It says that all countries are the dough for the land of Israel, and the land of Israel is the dough for Babylon. In other words, what he's saying is, the expression half-baked? Well, he's saying not baked at all. In other words, what he's trying to say was the land of Israel was just the dough for Babylon, which is the actual bread. Now listen. Iraq Jews carried the trade of their land to Central Asia, India, and beyond, and some of the emissaries of Babylon and Persian Jews to Bukhara served as viziers in the courts of the emirs and the great moguls of India. Now listen. Historically, he feels, the Jews of Persia had their own distinction. It was through their emissaries that the Khazars of Asia Minor adopted the Jewish faith in the 8th century. So who was it who converted the Khazars? Who was it who converted the Khazars? Real Jews? Babylonian traders? Right. So the problem is not that the Khazars were converted to Judaism and who's descended from them. It's that they never were converted to Judaism. They were converted to Babylonian heresy.
Now then. So that gives you an insight to, I would suggest, 3 perhaps, maybe 2, of what the elite insider were calling the ruling families. And that they set up the base here. Now, let me have another look here where we're at. Let's have a look. Now, I've said this earlier, that the real problem we've got is that it's the aristocracy that are running this show, as opposed to the monarch themselves. Where we go? Where is it? Now, this is Edward, right? So she said that in 1270, this Dengul guy brought in the title and given himself the Exarch, which means capstone. Now, Edward I came to the crown in 1274. So this is the same thing. So this is what Edward was battling. Yeah? Because he kicked out all the Jews of the day. Because of this declaration by Dengul that he was the Exarch of this new system that they were pushing. So that's what Edward were actually fighting when he did that. Now, why I think it's so important, because I've never seen it in this way before. I've always wondered why did he kick out all the Jewish traders? But what it's looking like to me is that is what they were all fighting. This new empire by these Babylonian kings of trade. You know what I'm saying? Their wealth, their power came through their wealth, not necessarily title. You know, and then this guy gives himself this title. And then you've got Edward kicking it off. So it says Edward I, actually the 4th, but who's counting, is familiar to most as the antagonist in the 1995 film Braveheart. But we don't need to go through that. It's just a bit. It says the real Edward I, one of the most influential monarchs to ever take the English throne. His lengthy reign shaped the course of not only English history, but also Scottish and Welsh history for years to come. He lived an eventful life full of adventure, intrigue, innovation and savage cruelty against those who opposed him. This collection showcases some of the most interesting details of Edward's life. Now, if you want, we can just go through the titles. He said, he built the world's largest trebuchet and refused to accept a surrender until he got to use it. That were jocks, that. They surrendered. He said, no, I haven't used this yet. So used it and then let it accepted. So that were a bit naughty. He was just showing off. He passed a series of key reforms at the start of his reign. This is another area where his Braveheart portrayal doesn't do him justice. Edward wasn't the tyrant shown in the film, quite the opposite. When he ascended to the throne in 1274, his first major act was to conduct a great survey of the kingdom. This led to the most comprehensive review of England in more than 200 years. The findings would later be recorded as the 100 Rolls. and original documents are still housed in the UK's National Archives. Today, Edward issued a series of reforms to re-establish royal authority and to address the grievances that sparked the conflicts that had blighted his father's reign. He had little faith in his heir. Edward II was Edward's oldest son, surviving son, and while he was similar to his father in appearance, he was also tall and muscular, so he was a ginger nut. He lacked his father's vigour when it came to leadership. The elder Edward was also deeply troubled by the allegations of his son's relationship with a knight named Piers Gaveston. When he learned of the younger Edward's intention to bestow lands upon his favourite, he summoned his son to a tense meeting. A chronicler records the choice of words the king had for his son. "You bastard son of a bitch. Now you want to give my lands away, you who never gained any. As the Lord lives, were it not for fear of breaking up the kingdom, you should never enjoy your inheritance." So I think he was cross. The verbal abuse was matched with a physical assault. The elder Edward seized his son by the ear and tore out as much of it as he could before dismissing his heir. He became increasingly agitated toward the end of his life, doubtless foreseeing the trouble ahead for this dynasty. So you could see that his son were a bit rubbish. He survived an assassination attempt in 1272, so this is before he became king. And this was because of his opposition to a peace deal with the Muslim rulers of the Holy Land. A bounty was placed on the English monarch's head. On June the 1st, 1272, Edward was assailed by an assassin. He was able to disarm and finish off his would-be slayer, but suffered a serious injury in the process. The wound was believed to have been inflicted with a tainted blade, almost certainly invented by a later writer. One story had that the ever-devoted Eleanor sucked the poison from her husband's wound to save his life. Although the romantic story is unlikely to have occurred, Edward was seriously injured in the onslaught. The king's life was saved by an extraordinary painful procedure, where the flesh blackened by the toxin was hacked away by a surgeon. Ooh. Edward drew up a will in the likely event of him succumbing to infection, but he ultimately pulled through. After spending Christmas 1272 in Italy, on the way home he returned to England to learn that he had become king. Although he planned to return to the Holy Lands on a crusade, his 1272 departure proved final. In the 13th century, lords and kings weren't slain on the battlefields. They were much too valuable to be offed like common peasants. Capture then ransom was the standard practice of the day. As a young man, Edward's future kingdom was in the midst of a power struggle between the English crown and the nobility. The balance of power swung back and forth, with the rebel leader Simon de Montfort succeeding in capturing Edward. His nephew on more than one occasion. Captured Edward. So Edward's his nephew and he captured him on more than one occasion. However, Edward wasn't content to stay put as promised and escaped. The most brazen case was when he was permitted to exercise his horses outside the castle walls along with the guards. The young prince rode horse until all but one of his animals were exhausted. He hopped on the last fresh horse and reportedly shouted to his captors, "Lordlings, I bid you good day. Greet my father well and tell him I hope to see him soon, to release him from custody." So this guy were a proper geezer. He then sped off into the night and raised a new army to wrest control the kingdom back to the crown. He had a huge number of children, most perished. In Braveheart, we only see Edward II, but Edward I sired many more children besides his disappointing heir. With his first wife, he was father to at least 14 children. As was often the case in the Middle Ages, many of the king's offspring did not survive into adulthood. Edward II was actually the youngest of the children born to Eleanor. So that was his first wife, whom he loved dearly, and vice versa. But 14 children dying, you know what I'm saying? I've seen so much when you study these things to say that the court were killing these children. This is how they managed to get their own on and declare and determine which offspring would best suit their purpose. With his second wife, Margaret of France, Edward, and that's her in the picture to the right, Edward fathered 3 more children, one of whom survived into adulthood. In all, only 6 of his many children outlived him. He perished while gathering an army for yet another invasion of Scotland. With the news of Robert the Bruce's success in Scotland, Edward I evidently decided that the seventh time was the charm and prepared to launch another incursion to bring the Bruce to heel. At the for the time ripe old age of 68, a military expedition was a tall order, even for Longshanks. Ultimately, he contacted dysentery and passed shortly after on July the 7th, 1307, at Burghs-Besant. During the ill-fated, he sought an alliance with the Mongols. That's a bit naughty. During the ill-fated 8th, but then he was a man of his day. During the ill-fated 8th Crusade, Edward found an unlikely ally in the form of the Mongols. Seldom, as the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, being truer than it was when the Christian Crusaders realised the ferocity of the pagan Mongols could be useful if turned against their mutual enemy, the Mamelukes. Upon his arrival in Accra, Edward dispatched emissaries to seek an alliance. Abaka Khan, leader of the Ilkhanate, was receptive to the plan and agreed to strike Syria from a base in modern-day Iran. The diversion allowed the Crusaders to launch an unsuccessful bid to take a key castle on the road to Jerusalem. The siege failed when a relieving force arrived and the Mongols withdrew from Syria without a decisive engagement. Abaku's successor would ultimately convert to Islam and remove the possibility of further military cooperation with the Crusaders. Alexander III of Scotland was considered a friend and ally by Edward. Edward's relations with Scotland were initially cordial. The Scottish King Alexander III even went as far as sending a detachment of troops to support the English crown in the Second Barons' War. A possible marriage between Alexander's only surviving heir, Margaret of Norway, and Edward's son was seriously discussed in 1284. Had his match come to pass, it would have effectively tied the two kingdoms, together peacefully some 300 years before the ascension of King James VI and I in 1603. Fate decreed otherwise when Margaret passed in 1290, at the young age of 7, plunging the Kingdom of Scotland into a succession crisis that ultimately culminated in Edward's claim of overlordship. So it weren't being just overly crap, it were a proper succession kind of thing. Edward would have spoken French, so he did. He were a French guy like they all were. So we don't really need to bother. It says, like other English monarchs following the Norman conquest, Edward's native language was French, and he learned the tongue of his kingdom as a child. He was also reasonably proficient in Latin, as that was still the written language of government. Edward subjected his uncle to a gruesome demise. The Second Barons' War was effectively ended with the Royalists' victory at the Battle of Evesham in 1265. So he's not king at this point. Edward managed to trap de Montfort's army by carefully shadowing the smaller force during the night. With no way out, de Montfort was forced to accept battle at deeply unfavourable conditions. Aside from Edward's generalship, what set the engagement apart from the others at the time was the unrestrained savagery at its conclusion. Ordinarily, important knights and nobles were taken prisoner in battle. It was comparatively rare for troops to deliberately terminate such men of means. But at Evesham, the Royalists were in no mood for clemency. Edward ordered his troops to show no mercy whatever, and they responded eagerly. The baronial army was almost completely annihilated. Even those who sought shelter in nearby Abbey were not spared Edward's wrath. Simon de Montfort was given the worst fate of all. Prior to the engagement, Edward tasked a dozen of his best men with specifically finding de Montfort and finishing him off. To add one final insult to injury, de Montfort's genitals were cut off and stuffed in his mouth and decapitated. So he was a bit of a bugger. But he was a man of his day, really, let's be honest. Longshanks referred to his exceptionally long legs, which is quite correct. He was 6 foot 2 inches tall, which for the day was very unusual. His other nickname was Hammer of the Scots, and it was well earned. Edward looted the Scottish kingdom and its most precious heirlooms, including the Stone of Destiny, and sacked the key city of Berwick. Once done, with his systematic destruction of the Scottish kingdom's identity, he passed control over to a governor, joking that a man does good business when he rids himself of a turd. So there you go. His conception might have saved his father's life. So it's Edward's father, Henry III, was almost dispatched on the night of September the 9th, 1238, when a knife-wielding madman broke into his bedchambers. Fortunately for Henry and the unborn Edward, the king wasn't there to meet a premature end. Instead, he was with his young wife Eleanor of Provence. A little more than 9 months later, Edward was born on June 17th, 1239. He was a devoted husband. Royal marriages in the Middle Ages were usually strategic matches to solidify alliances and settle territorial disputes. Children came from such unions from a sense of duty rather than as a result of genuine love and affection. Unlike most marriages of the time, Edward was devoted to his spouse Eleanor of Castile. Eleanor played an important role in the struggle with the English nobility, even helping to bring over troops from France to support the royal side. She accompanied Edward on his many campaigns, even travelling with him to take part in the Eighth Crusade, where she arranged to have a copy of an ancient Roman treatise on warfare translated for her husband. He was generally devastated by her premature demise in 1290 and erected a series of crosses, the Eleanor crosses. Charing crosses is, I think, the only one left. By her premature demise in 1290 and erected a series of crosses, the Eleanor crosses, wherever the body stopped on the way back to London. Once laid to rest, the king ordered that 2 candles were to burn beside her tomb in Westminster Abbey for eternity. While they fell short in this impossible goal, they were still kept alive for a staggering 250 years. Some of the crosses erected in Eleanor's memory are still standing to this day, which is interesting because 250 years from, you're getting into Tudor times. Ooh, so the Tudors again is showing that they were a complete separation away from the England of Edward. He was actually the 4th king of England named Edward, which he were Edward the Elder, Edward the Martyr, Edward the Confessor, and Edward the First were called Edward because he was the first. As for Edward the First, the designation of first became because he was succeeded by his son, also named Edward, and then by his grandson named, you guessed it, Edward. Having 3 Edwards in quick succession meant it was just easier to start numbering them. Edward the First was the first Edward since the conquest of 1066. He ordered the expulsion of the Jews from the kingdom. Although several innovations stem from Edward's reign, he was still very much a man of his time and held many of the same prejudices as his contemporaries, but that's because of the Babylonian Jewish Empire that were being put into to practice again. One of his first acts as king was the Statutes of the Jewry in 1275. The act restricted the commercial opportunities of England's small but economically active Jewish community. This was eventually followed by a 1290 edict that expelled the Jews from the kingdom entirely. It didn't expel them all though, okay? So it would have been just the ones that were tied to this new system. Because he didn't expel them all. He allowed certain people in certain areas to carry on. So it wasn't anti-Jewish per se, it was anti-something else that we're building. And I think that lady has explained to us what that was. The expulsion of, which it's got hold of it now, hasn't it? The expulsion of Jewish communities was nothing new in medieval Europe or even in England itself. Edward's uncle and mother had both enacted expulsions of Jews in their own domains some years prior. Similar measures had been taken in France and Brittany in the 12th and 13th centuries. Pogroms and other atrocities against Jews were all too common in the Middle Ages. Edward's measure to expel the Jews was wildly popular with his subjects, so it was an agreed thing in England at the time. In gratitude, the Knights of the Shire presented Edward the colossal grant of 116,000 quid, the largest collection of revenue in the Middle Ages. Not to be outdone, the Catholic Church presented the king with even more money in the fall of 1290. So you can see that this system that was being set up by this bunch that now took control of our aristocratic system, landowning bunch here, Den Gaul, Sassoon and Cador, this is what they were fighting, but England were fighting it, the Catholic Church were fighting it. Yeah? Scotland got took over by that other bunch, of course, because they were hated English. So you have to be careful when you go to war, because it opens up for this other side to get in and end up controlling all of you. So it is interesting stuff that. I don't know if it's interesting for you, but if you like history, but more importantly, what we've just looked at there, that it is clearly an aristocracy, banking, trading aristocracy that's controlling this whole show But it pretty much shows that it's took over the whole world, and it's ultimately a priesthood out of Babylon, which is why you class them as the Sufis, because it's a strange form of Zoroastrianism, which is probably the first monotheistic before Akhenaten. And again, Eros from Babylon. So it's all interesting stuff when you get down to nitty gritty. That, let me just check that there's nothing else I wanted to talk about. Let's have a look. No, I think we've covered it, chaps. And I will put those things up. Now, we will look at the Church of the Estates, but I've covered a lot of it today in relation to how Queen Elizabeth took the land and the mineral wealth, and her husband then claimed all the property and assets as persons dead. So the Church of the Estates is the empire of the dead. Can you see? Also, what I found as well this week is just looking. If we want to look at the how it moved from slavery to eventually the freedom we've had since the war, and why they're pulling us back into slavery, it's that originally it was slavery in Rome, in Greece, everywhere, Persia. They were all based on slave systems. But then here, in England specifically, we're talking about, some of these slaves were freed, and stuff, and became free men, and were apportioned some land. Now, it shifted after the freemen, because obviously the aristocracy weren't happy with the freemen having their own land. They created the colony, which was the aristocracy tied those that were free men to the land, and that pulled them back into the control, and then it moved to serfdom with the 1066. Yeah? So during the time of Alfred and before you got freemen, etc., when it would all be moving away from slavery, because the actual slavers were the Saxons in London Vic. Before it was Londinium. It was London Vic before. And it was a Saxon slaver trading port. Yeah, so that's London Vic, yeah? So that's where slavery started here in the British Isles. The Romans took slaves from the British Isles across. But then it started to shift at Alfred's time, and after that, as they were pulling these kingdoms together. Now, I know we're told it was a Saxon king, but there's a lot to suggest that he was actually a Trojan king, was Alfred, and that they've changed this narrative to further support this Germanic system, which this dark system that we've just been looking at, they took over Germany a long time before, or Prussians anyway. Which is why, and they hype everybody, So then it got to serf after 1066. Slowly but surely, those serfs were given land and their freedom. A lot of them would end up working back for those that were the masters before, but in a balanced way. And so England became a superb expression of a nation that weren't operating with slavery. Because we'd come away from it. So like the blacks think they were slaves, yeah. But so are the whites. We're all coming away from that system. But now they're pulling us all back. And the way they're obfuscating England is because they're getting different cultures now to start hating each other. Because the minute you start falling out like that, you're not putting it where it is, and that's this big, huge jackboot system that's setting up all around us, folks. Going to get a lot worse now with the changes we've had. Boris the bombshell's gone, even though his speech is suggesting he's coming back with the Roman Cincinnati guy he presented. So it does look like there is a plan that he may be coming back again. But it's what they're going to get done. While kings, you've got Charles and you've got Truss. They're going to get something done so ridiculous in this particular point now that it's going to be not beneficial to us. It's going to pull more of this system into the aristocratic hands. So that's interesting again for us to keep in mind. Would you not agree? So yeah, I'll have a look at what you guys do, and we'll go back to Culpeper. I don't think I've missed anything. I think there's a few subject matter I have missed, but I couldn't bring them back and formulate them. So I hope that makes sense to you, what we've just gone through today. If you know what I mean. So can you let me know whether that's gone down well? Or we're a bit off the wall? Good night, pick up rest tomorrow. Good night, Moo. Doesn't surprise me. What about the Astors? Yeah, the Astors are a major portent, but they're a public. So what I'm trying to say is you're looking at... it's Sassoon, not Sassoon. And she made it clear that Vidal Sassoon, although it's a branch of Sassoon, it's actually a very low level one. So he's not a part of the ruling families. You've got to remember, the ruling families only have one member running each family, and they're the ones that are making up this committee. Okay, it's not the whole family name. There's only one family that's holding the estate of the entire, and that's why they keep on the primogeniture. You see, all to to one, they can control that one. They play the game with the killing of the kids to make sure that it's the right one that comes in as the heir, the one, and usually where they've bred into their own genes, and that's how they've done this. And as I said last week, this is what they've done through keeping the rhesus negative as a front. Because it doesn't matter what blood you are, whether you're dragon, whatever you're rhesus negative, we're all under the same law here, spiritual law. Regardless of who we are, we're all fixed to being under that law. Simple as. We're not talking about religious law, we're talking about spiritual law, as it really is in real time. Tried to kill Yana. Yana's was from the Czech Republic. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. A lot. Another guy's just been thrown out of a window. There's a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, Bruce did invite the Templars. But you've also got to remember the main bulk of the Templar power went to Portugal. And if you actually look at the Atlantic coast and follow the rivers into Portugal, them rivers go right into Spain. They're that long, and you would get ships in a good way. So that's why the Templar Navy went to Portugal. And of course, the first colonial power, when you look back in history, was Portugal. Was it not? Yeah, Portugal and Spain, because the Pope put the Holy Roman Empire in the hands of the two. So Portugal was the first colonizer in relation to the Holy Roman Empire of the last 1,000 years, if we want to look at it that way. So in the last 1,000 years, the last millennium, it was Portugal that kicked off the colonisation, and then Spain. We didn't go colonising the British Empire until Hanoverians had gone into it, so you've got to remember that. And then it became the British Empire. His balls cut off and stuck there. In his, do you know what they did to Guy Fawkes? Oh man, he took him up into clock on Parliament and put his balls. You see, put his balls between the hammer and the bell and chimed it. Oh man, do you know why they did that? Guy Fawkes with nothing to do with the plot against, in the way that they're talking and the leader. It was Percy's. Guy Fawkes was loved by all the aristocracy's women because he had a big todger, right? And they hated him. They hated Guy Fawkes because all the wives were in love with him. Eh? They don't tell you that kind of stuff. So they did that to his bollocks. Oh, man! Ooh, not good. So it were interesting. I'm glad it were interesting, that, because I want to go back to it and listen to it again as well and see if I didn't miss anything out, because it pulls together the fact that we've got a foreign entity running our aristocracy. It's all been about land and minerals all over the world through Queen Elizabeth II being the chair of the estates, thus offering up to a king, Philip, all the assets and property of the persons attached to that land. This is what they've done. This is what they've done. So this wasn't the Roman system. Never was. This is this Dravidic system. Sephardic. You know, they've captured all the Khazars and stuck them all, had them do all the things, suffer in the pogroms. and then stick them in Israel, ready for this insanity, where it's 1/3 of the population of Israel are going to be annihilated. I mean, it's so... but you've got to think, this stuff only works if you're thinking in terms of empire, you're thinking in terms of superiority. It can only attract you. It's a negative aspect of the human condition that gets, if it's in you, that gets massaged by the machine. Do you know what I mean? And then you get trapped in these things, and it's like, oh, before you know where you are, it becomes real, and it's like, whoa, coming on. If we need to learn anything as we move into this next new sun or whatever, it's that kind of trickery, how we trick ourselves, because it's our negative traits that pull us in. And you know what I mean? It's like, oh, good grief, that's how it works, you know. It really is down to us as individuals as to how we play out in this game. And if you're into power, you're into controlling people, you're only ever going to be operating under these shadow forces, the shadow side of a frequency. You know what I mean? And you've got to really pull your spiritual self together and be aware that a lot of these temptations are going to drag you into scenarios that are going to cause you some friction, some problems, and possibly run away with that desire, that emotion, or whatever it is, and wreck your entire life. If I felt something in the bed, it was part of you. All right, you're on the chin wag. Bloody hell. Ding dong, right on the bell. So what time are we on? 56. We'll go through some cold peppers, guys, and then we can knock this one off as another Sunday live stream as we enter into interesting times, I tell you. So, this is water betony, called also broomwort, and in Yorkshire, bishop's leaves. Description: the water betony riseth up with square hard greenish stuff. Have we done these? I think we've done these. Oh. Do you know, I can't remember whether we've done these or not, chaps. So, I'll tell you what, just in case, we'll leave it. I don't want to be repeating myself on the live streams. Well, I hope that... I can't wait, actually, to listen back to that, because I need to see. I think I've missed some data that pulled it together a bit more, but hopefully it makes sense. So, well then, chaps and chapesses, I will say to you, thank you very much for joining, as usual, and I will say, till the next time.
Electronic